Recording. There we go. We are recording as of now. Welcome to all of you to our latest Zoom meeting on the subject of New Hebrides today. Clemens Albert is going to be our speaker. I'll let him pronounce his name in the German manner, but Clemens sits in Germany as he's talking to us today. He will be sharing his program with us. Before we do that, and I hesitate to do this before the meeting because then people start thinking, oh my gosh, I'm missing the really good program. But what I want to do is tell you what our next lineup is, because I've actually been able to sign people up. Next month in November is the American Thanksgiving holiday, which is typically 4 days long, Thursday through Sunday. So rather than have the program in November, it will be the first Sunday in December, December 5th. And Mick Bister, who spoke to the UK Français Colonies group about the life and times of the 1 franc 50 pétain issue, will speak to us using the same program. In January, the 23rd, Dick Stevens will present the Antilles tertiary issue of Martinique. The end of February, Mike Bass will have a program on France and the Holy Land. And March 27th, Jim Taylor will illuminate the Félix Éboué, heck no, French colonial administrator and the French liberation hero. So we have programs all the way out through March at this point. So having now teased everybody with future events, it's now time for Clemens to start telling us about New Hebrides. So as I said earlier, I will mute everybody, and then Clemens, you will have to unmute yourself. And before we do that, you want to share your screen and make sure it's working. There we go.
Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes. So go ahead, please.
Okay. Greetings from Freising, Germany, and thank you for giving me the chance to present parts of my collection today to the Friends and Colonies Philatelic Society. First of all, my English, which used to be better, has become a little rusty in the last years, so please excuse me. I will read most parts of the presentation, and well, you know. The archipelago of the New Hébrides, which since 1980 is the Republic of Vanuatu, is situated about 2,500 kilometers northeast of Sydney. 2,500 kilometers is about 1,500 miles. The New Hebrides was a politically and philatelically fascinating territory, being neither a British nor a French colony. Instead, it was governed by the two powers jointly as a so-called condominium. The condominium was established in 1906 as a result of the alliance of France and the UK and the so-called Entente Cordiale. And under the condominium, there were 3 separate administrations, 1 French, 1 British, and 1 joint administration, with the latter having jurisdiction over the postal service. So there was only 1 postal administration, not 2. The condominium lasted until 1980, when the New Hebrides gained its independence as the Republic of Vanuatu. A result of this arrangement was that British and French collectors and philatelists for a long time avoided the territory, since it was jointly governed by a foreign power, which left the New Hebrides with a relatively small group of followers. Until today, for example, the British and the French stamps of the New Hebrides are listed separately in the Stanley Gibbons catalog. It's different in the Michel and in the Hiver catalog. I'm not sure about the Scott catalog, but they are listed separately in the Stanley Gibbons, which obstructs, in my view, the view on the interrelationship of the issues, their single source, and the single authority under which they were issued, resulting in the stamps being collected according to whether they were British or French. This is a great pity, since exactly the nature of the archipelago as a condominium makes it an unusual and fascinating country to collect and to research. Orange apples. I saw an interview by Peter McCann for the Collectors Club, and he was asked what the difference were between collecting a British Caribbean colony and a French Caribbean colony, and he listed up the differences and said it was like comparing oranges and apples. So in this logic, the New Hebrides are orange apples. Looking at the stamps, one can see how the unique arrangement of the condominium is reflected in the stamps. The contrast of the French and the British influence is shown through the dual printings of the stamps, the currencies, the watermarks, the overprints, and the rates and routes of mail. The goal of this presentation is to give a short overview of the New Hebrides stamps and postal history. It will therefore not go too much into detail, but will touch most topics on the surface. It will be kind of a rush, which I apologize for. Maybe some of the topics are good for another Zoom presentation. If you're interested for further reading, I can strongly recommend Roland Klinger's page, www.roland-klinger.de/nh. There is everything you want to know about this subject. Okay, why is this not working? Okay. In most of the 19th century, there was no regular postal system and no record on how a letter should be addressed to reach its destination. The lack of an official postal service caused dependence on passing ships to take letters to the nearest port with such facilities, so that postal items related to the New Hebrides can only be identified by inscriptions on the letters. Information on the postal system in the early and middle years of the 19th century is scarce, but as far as we know, incoming letters were transported to Sydney or to Noumea, New Caledonia, and then sent to the New Hebrides whenever suitable transport was available. The chaotic times without a regular postal system lasted through most of the 19th century. An official postal system reached the archipelago only in the early 1890s, with the establishment of a postal agency by the government of New South Wales. On the right, you see an incoming letter from 1842 from Sydney to a Mr. Nisbet on the island of Tanna. The Reverend Henry Nisbet was a British missionary for the London Missionary Society, a Presbyterian church, who had left England for the Pacific Islands in August 1840, and along with a fellow missionary had reached Samoa a year later. They went on to Tanna in the south of the New Hebrides in June 1842 and stayed there until January 1843. The sender can be identified as Lydia Crook of Sydney, daughter of the noted missionary William Pascoe Crook. According to his diary, Nisbet received post, including this letter, by the vessel Camden on the 9th of December 1842. Well, as I said, the New South Wales established a postal agency on the New Hebrides in 1891. It was first located on the southern island of Anatom, but was transferred to Port Vila, today's capital, in the following year of 1892. The agency was first operated by the Australasian United Steam Navigation Company, whose local manager was named postal agent for the New Hebrides on the 1st of July, 1892. In the following year, the responsibility was devolved upon the Australasian New Hebrid Company on the basis of a company contract. After the bankruptcy of the ANHCO, Burns Philp and Company entered into a 10-year contract with the New South Wales government on September 1st, 1900. The postal agency was supplied with New South Wales stamps from 1892 on. The agency closed following the advent of the condominium post office in 1908. On the right, you see a typical letter of that time handled by the New South Wales Postal Agency. It's correctly framed with the intercolonial British letter rate of 2 pennies. letters handled by the New South Wales Postal Agency are very hard to come by, and if you find one, they are relatively expensive, because not only the New Hebrides collectors are interested in them, but also collectors who collect colonial Australia, and especially New South Wales. Then we have the New Caledonia Postal Agency. On the 20th of March 1903, the New Caledonian authorities issued a decree establishing a postal agency on board of the vessel that operated between New Caledonia and the New Hebrides. The first mail contract was granted to the Société Française des Nouvelles Hébrides. By further decree on December 14th, 1904, a postal agency was established in Port Vila with a new contract granted to Messageries Maritimes. The post agency was supplied with stamps of New Caledonia and with 2 cancels, Port Vila and Port Sandwich. Port Vila was, as I said, the capital of the archipelago. It is still the capital today. Port Sandwich was not really a post office. It was basically a collection point where the incoming mail from the outer islands was collected on the island of Malekula, but there was not a real post office in that place. In fact, the main post office in Port Vila remained the only post office in the New Hebrides until 1940. So no small village use here. On the right, you see an example of post handled by the New Caledonia Agency, a letter to Bonn, Algeria, which today is Annaba. It's correctly franked with 15 centimes, which was the French colonial tariff until 1906, when it was lowered to 10 centimes. I like this letter for 3 reasons. First of all, it's one of the oldest recorded letters handled by the New Caledonian Postal Agency. The second reason, it's a nice destination in Algeria. And the third reason, I was able to purchase it on Del Campe for a very reasonable price. Then this is the non-colonial rate, a letter to the editor of the German Samoanische Zeitung, Erich Lübke, in Apia, Samoa, franked with 25 centimes, New Caledonian stamp. As you know, Samoa was a German colony at that time, so the non-colonial tariff was used. On letters handled by the New Caledonian Agency, you find stamps both of the 1892 group type and of the 1905 Kagu series of New Caledonia. I have some Kagu examples, but I prefer to show the group type examples today, because I know we have a group type enthusiast among us. Then we had two local issues. The first is by the Australasian New Hebrid Company. The company that was founded in 1887 handled the ship traffic between Australia and the New Hebrides. In 1893, the ANHCO took on the responsibility for handling the mails for the New South Wales Postal Agency. And being financially weak from the beginning, the company tried to establish an islands postal system for letters sent between the islands and the letters sent from the archipelago to Sydney. The New South Wales government did not object as long as their stamps were used for mail to Sydney. The company failed anyway, but on the 17th of March 1897, it issued, shortly before it went bankrupt, 1 penny and 2 penny local stamps for inter-island postage and for mail to and from Sydney that was carried with their ships. The company, as I said, failed anyway, and Prince Philip and Company took over its assets, including the remainders of the stamps. It was printed in relatively high numbers, and it was used in low numbers because the company went bankrupt so fast, and this is why you find these stamps relatively easy. Then we have the local issues of the Syndicat Français des Nouvelles Hébrides. These local issues were an ambitious attempt of French settlers to establish their own postal system in the New Hebrides. The reason might have been that the establishment of the New Caledonian Postal Agency was very long in coming. It opened, as I said, only in 1903. After being announced in September 1902, the 4 values were produced in Marseille and were issued on supposedly the 1st of September 1903. However, the syndicat operated for only 3 weeks. The stamps were suppressed by order of the governor of New Caledonia, and the existing stocks were confiscated. Nevertheless, a significant amount of them went on sale as souvenirs, mostly on favor stamped postcards. One of them you see on the left. It's a regular postcard with handled by the New Caledonian Agency. This time it's the Kagoo series, and the local issue as a souvenir. Then we have the first New Hebrid stamps. In 1908, the condominium post office came into being on the 1st of October 1908 as a joint authority, 2 years after the condominium was founded. Both colonial administrations had agreed on the use of the French colonial postal tariff and on the use of provisional overprints until the launch of the first definitives. Definitives were not issued right away because the condominium was not a member of the UPU yet. It joined the UPU only in 1911. And this is why stamps of two colonial entities that were already a member of the UPU were overprinted and used. The British provisional issues were the first available and issued in Port Vila on the 29th of October 1908. 7 issues of the 1903 King Edward VII Fiji keyplate series were overprinted with the words New Hebrides Condominium at a government printing establishment in Suva, Fiji. The 2-penny to 6-penny values were printed on the original 1903 paper with the watermark single crown CA, and the values of half-penny, 1 penny, and 1 shilling on the new 1908 paper with the new watermark multiple crown CA. CA stands for Crown Agents. I accidentally forgot to show the watermarks here, but okay, you can look it up in any catalog, I guess. By accident, small quantities of the half-penny and the 1 shilling issue were printed on stocks of the 1903 paper, which is why on this page there are 2 of them. The stamps had been printed in sheets of 120, divided vertically into 2 panes of 60. Both panes were surrounded by the so-called Jubilee line that was introduced in 1887 by De La Rue to protect the plates in the printing process. Plate numbers were printed at the top above and the bottom below the second stamp from the left and from the right, as you can see down here. And then the 1 penny value has a rare and outstanding variety. This is new in my collection. I bought this strip of stamps about 2 months ago. It's the highlight of my collection, the new highlight. During the process of overprinting, 1 row of stamps was missed in 1 sheet because the stereo plate fell out of the form, resulting in saturnine vertical pairs, 1 stamp with and 1 without overprint. 14 examples of this variety are known. From the left pane, 6 pairs were formed with the upper stamp carrying no overprint. From the right pane, a corner block of 10 stamps is known, as well as a pair of stamp with the lower stamp carrying no overprint, and 3 strips of 4, 1 with gutter, that is the one you see on the right. In addition, there are 2 more pairs with the lower stamp without overprint. However, the upper stamp of these pairs shows an inclined overprint. They must descend from a following sheet that was furthermore ruined by this slipping stereo plate. It's printer's waste. Okay, here's some examples of the 1908 British issue. On the left, a letter to Nemea, New Caledonia, franked with 1 penny, which is equivalent to 10 centimes. That is the correct intercolonial letter rate in the French postal tariff at that time. The French Service Maritime Cancel that is used here was used on ships between the islands of the archipelago. And this is one of the reasons why I like collecting the New Hebrides. The sender of this letter was no doubt French. The addressee is French. The journal that he's working for is called Le Républicain, and both did not bother franking the letter with a stamp that showed the image of the British monarch. On the right side, you see a registered letter from Port Vila to Sydney, framed with the British 2 penny and 2.5 penny stamps, which was the correct rate for a registered letter to Australia. It's one of the scarce letters with the correct registered letter rate of that time. Now we come to the French issues. The French had started or had tried to start 1 year earlier in 1907. 5 values of the 1905 New Caledonia Cargo series were manually overprinted diagonally with Nouvelles Hébrides at the Atelier du Timbre in Paris. The results, however, were irregular or were considered irregular by the British. The British administration further objected the lack of the word condominium because without the word condominium, it seemed that the New Hebrides were in fact a French colony, which they were not. And this is why the issue was rejected by the British part of the administration, and the stamps are treated today as essays, which they are in a sense. In a second attempt, the series was overprinted horizontally with the words Nouvelles Hébrides by the Atelier du Timbre in Paris in 6 panes of 25 stamps per sheet. The 1 franc value in sheets of 3 panes of 25 stamps on unwatermarked paper. Only a small portion was sent to Port Vila for actual postal use. The main portion stayed in Paris and was sold to collectors, which is why you can get these stamps very, very easy today. They are here in high numbers. And as you see, just as in the 1907 essays, the word condominium was missing, but the provisional stamps were accepted. Nevertheless, the British had given up. 2 examples. On the left side, a letter to Nice with the correct postage of 10 centimes, the French colonial tariff, and on the right side, a letter to Leipzig, Germany, paid with 20 centimes. Since the non-colonial rate was 25 centimes, this was an underpayment of 5 centimes, and the charge, which was double the underpaid amount, is indicated here by a manuscript and with the T and triangle hand stamped. That is, as you see, a mixed franking. This was possible. A registered letter to Paris with 2 French 10 centime stamps and an English 2.5 penny stamp. This must have been a double weight letter, since the intercolonial letter rate to France was, as I said, 10 centimes per 15 gram, and the registration rate was 25 centimes or 2.5 pennies. So the French stamps for the postal tariff and the British stamp for the registration fee. The stocks of the provisional British 1908 series were already running low in 1910 with no sign of the planned New Hebrides definitives. Therefore, an order was placed with De La Rue for further provisional supply, and 7 values of the 1903 Fiji definitives were overprinted in moderate numbers by typeset. They went on sale in Port Vila on the 15th of December 1910. On the left side, a letter to France with the French colonial tariff of 1 penny or 10 centimes. And on the right side, a double rate letter to France, Saint-Foy-les-Lyons, with a two-penny stamp, again, French destination, British stamps. Those are registered letters. On the left, a registered letter to Sydney, New South Wales, and on the right side, a letter to France, Paris. Both are franked with 1 shilling, which is a very high franking. I'm not sure about the tariff. The left letter is philatelic. It's clearly philatelic because of the addressee, Mr. Hambly, which used to be a very well-known cover maker throughout the whole South Pacific. But the one on the right side doesn't seem to be philatelic. It seems commercial. It must have been relatively heavy and probably insured, because the regular fee for a registered colonial letter was only 35 centimes. Maybe someone can help me in the question and answers section later on with the tariff. Then we have also a second French overprint. Of course, the omitting the word condominium again caused protests from the British, because it breached the condominium agreement, and after the stocks of the 1908 stamps ran low and need for further provisionals occurred, excuse me, this mistake was corrected with a second provisional series. The values of 5 and 10 centimes and 1 franc went on sale in Port Vila in September 1910, whereas the other 2 values were shipped there only in 1911. It is doubtful if the 2 values of 25 and 50 centimes were ever officially on sale in Port Vila. The sale of the series in Paris to collectors had, as you can imagine, started long before. The overprinted stamps of 1908 and 1910 were all from 1 special edition with the millésime 8, the year 1908. They were printed only for the purpose to be issued with the overprint in the New Hebrides and were not issued without overprint in New Caledonia, at least to my knowledge. 2 examples. On the left side, a postcard to London with the correct intercolonial letter rate of 10 centimes, and on the right side, a registered letter with 35 centimes. And we have also a mixed franking. I love mixed frankings. A letter to Coffs Harbour, Australia, franked with the heavy letter rate or the triple letter rate of 3 pennies or 30 centimes. Then in 1911, we had the first real definitive issue of the New Hebrides, of the condominium. The first definitives were launched following the entry of the condominium into the UPU on the 1st of March 1911. Separated British and French issues with the same design were released, picturing a local native cabin. The design was the work of Jules Giron, a local French resident, and both issues were recess printed by Delarue, again in London in sheets of 30. The stamps had already arrived at Port Vila in March 1911, but were held back and placed on sale on the 25th of July 1911 after the 1910 provisional issues were exhausted. You see on the left the British version of the halfpenny stamp in English, with the coat of arms of the French Republic on the left side and the coat of arms of the British monarch on the right side, and the British currency. And on the right side, the French version, it's the other way around, the coats of arms, and of course in French currency. This is the whole set, the British set above and the French set at the bottom. So it is a lot of stamps. It's part of the problems that I have with my exhibit. The British watermark, both issues, the French and the British were had a British watermark, but this caused disapproval in the French colonial administration. They were not happy with French stamps carrying a British watermark. And for that reason, De La Rue had to reprint the issue again in the following year, 1912. A special paper was created for this reissue in large sheets of 60 stamps with huge letters R and F in the sheets as a watermark. And because of the size of the watermark, many stamps do not have one at all. Some examples of the 1911 definitive series. On the left side, a letter to Montbert in France, carrying stamps. No, that is on the right side. On the left side, the letter is to Calvados with the intercolonial letter rate of 10 centimes, and on the right side, the letter to Montbert. This is a mixed franking again. It's carrying stamps of both the British and the French. It's one of the scarce World War I letters. There are many letters from the time before World War I. After 1914, there are considerably less letters because the collectors in Europe had other problems at that time. The letter rate to non-colonial destinations. Maybe I should explain that a colonial destination meant letters to France, to the United Kingdom, and to all territories that were in some sense linked to the British or the French colonial empire. Whether it was a colony, a protectorate, a dominium. So, for example, letters to the United States was the non-colonial tariff, and letters to Canada, which was a dominion in the British Empire at that time, was the colonial tariff. So it was cheaper to send letters there. The non-colonial tariff at that time until 1920 was 25 centimes or 2.5 penny, and the example on the left side shows a letter to the United States with that tariff. Then a registered letter to Apia, Samoa, framed with the triple rate of 7 pennies for non-colonial destinations, plus 2.5 penny registration. And I like that one, a letter that is a ship mail, letter to Uturoa on the island of Raiatea in French Polynesia via Papeete, Tahiti. It's transported with and cancelled on the Alcantara. The mailboat started the passenger service by Messagerie Maritime between Nouméa and Marseille in 1923, and after leaving Port Vila on the 21st of August 1923, the ship stopped at Suva and Apia before arriving in Tahiti on the 4th of September 1923, carrying this letter. It would leave Papeete on the 9th of September 1923 and arrive in Marseille via Panama on the 27th of October 1923. You see it's stamped with the Paquibo cancel of the ship. In 1921, the new watermark multiple script CA was introduced for colonial stamps, and therefore the values of 1, 2, and 6 pennies were reprinted on the new paper by De La Rue. This issue was placed on sale in Port Vila in August 1921. The 1911 series was in use until 1925. On the right side, a letter to Villemont Bleu France with the 3 2-penny stamps of the issue with the new watermark. Then we enter the 1920s. The first half of the 1920s represents a relatively chaotic time in the postal history of the New Hebrides, because the stocks of the 1911 and 12 definitives were running low and a new series was not planned yet. The reason was for the stocks running low was that a lot of the lower value stamps, the higher values were better protected, were destroyed by the tropical humidity, And as a result, a number of the higher values that were better protected was surcharged with lower values. At least that's the official story. The surcharge printing was performed by the government printer in Suva, Fiji. And in 1920, a number of 5 different values was surcharged. Those were the 1911 British values of 1, 2, and 5 shillings, and the French 1910 values of 25 and 50 centimes that were surcharged with 5 centimes and 10 centimes. In the printing process of the 1920 surcharge, at least one sheet of the 1908 provisional overprints was accidentally surcharged and sent into stocks to the post office in Port Vila, where they were sold. The number of surcharged 50 centimes stamps of the 1908 issue is uncertain, but there is some evidence that 2 sheets have been overprinted, and that would be 300 stamps, as there were 6 times 25 stamps on a sheet. This is an example of the use of the 1920 overprints. As you see, it's clearly philatelic. Commercial mail of this issue is existent, but it's very, very hard to come by because the issues were in use only for 1 year, and most of the stocks came into the hands of a Melbourne-based stamp dealer named William Ackland, and he produced a lot of these philatelic covers for collectors. The next set of surcharged issues was already released in 1921. However, it is highly questionable if this really happened because of a postal necessity. After a high number of stamps were overprinted just a year before, monetary interests of the postal administration seem to have been another reason. Again, these stocks came again into the hands of Mr. Egeland, and he produced these philatelic letters as well. It's the same as with the 1920 issues. Commercial mail is existent, but very hard to find. Then the last overprint set in 1924, more overprints were produced to meet the standards of the 1920 International Postal Convention, certain colors for all values. The government printer in Suva, Fiji was commissioned to overprint again old stocks to have the most important values comply with the convention. The colors were green for printed matters, red for local letters, and blue for letters abroad. And 2 panes of 30 stamps of the 5 penny on 2.5 penny value were accidentally inserted upside down, with the stamp having the surcharge inverted. Of the 60 stamps bearing the inverted overprint, 39 are known so far. This is one example. And then example of the 1924 stamps used on a letter, a registered postmaster letter to Paris with mixed frankings. 5 penny or 50 centimes was the correct intercolonial rate for registered letters. It's as you see, a mixed franking stamp of the original 1911 set and an overprinted stamp of 1924. In 1925, a new series of definitives was issued for the first time, with both colonial currency expressed on the same stamp. The necessity of new definitives being issued was the UPU 1920 colors and rate change. The design of 1911 was therefore modified, and the recessed printing was again performed by De La Rue in London. The British issue, with 9 denominations representing the British colonial rates, carries the French currency on the left and the British currency on the right. The French issue with 11 denominations had the British currency on the left and the French currency on the right side, as you can see down here. This is the whole set, or the whole 2 sets. used examples. On the left, a letter to Paris with the correct intercolonial letter rate of 50 centimes or 5 pennies. And on the right side, a letter to Lebanon. I won't pronounce the name of the city because I have no idea how to pronounce it correctly. It's franked with the correct colonial 50 centime rate, since Lebanon was under a French League of Nations mandate at that time. The recipient of the letter was Monsieur Pont-Lebrun, who ran the Domaine des Tourelles, the oldest commercial winery in Lebanon, which, by the way, is still in use today, however, not run by the family. This is an example of the non-colonial tariff, a letter to Connecticut bearing the correct rate for non-colonial letters of 1.50 franc, which is the equivalent of 1 shilling 3 penny. And we have registered letters, one to France, both to France, franked with 1.50 franc, the 50 centime new intercolonial letter rate for letters, plus 1 franc new intercolonial registration fee. And heavier letters, both with the triple letter rate. The one above is 1 franc because it is not registered, and the one at the bottom is on the left side is franked with 2 francs because the registration rate was, as I said, 1 franc since 1920. Then a nice anecdote. In July 1929, the French cruiser Tourville visited the New Hebrides carrying 2 waterplanes, and one of these was supposed to land in Port Vila. On this occasion, the first so-called airmail stamps were produced on the 16th of July 1929 by overprinting the stamps on cover with a Paravion rubber stamp. The letters were supposed to be flown to the Tourville by the waterplane. It is, however, uncertain until this day if the letters were actually in the air. If you want to know the whole story, please visit Roland Klinger's homepage. It is there. Nice to find. Then the first real airmail. The 1920s and 30s saw a worldwide expansion of airmail, but it was not until 1934 that a regular postal air service was established in the New Hebrides. The service seems to have started early in 1935 and involved shipping the post to Sydney and then flying it from there to its destination. The postage charge was calculated by adding the relevant surface rate plus relevant registration fee if required to the relevant air letter rate from Sydney, which was between 1935 and 38, 1 shilling 6 pennies to the United Kingdom and 1 shilling 9 pennies to the rest of Europe, including France, per half an ounce. The surface rate was calculated in metric weights, while the air letter rate was calculated in imperial weights, and this caused considerable confusion, with the results that almost all of these airmail covers show incorrect postage. Incorrect means overpaid, because the postmaster regularly miscalculated in his favor. On the right side, that is an example of this very early airmail, a registered airmail cover to France, and it is as usual overpaid. The 5 shilling 10 penny overpaid the postage by 2 shilling and 10 penny. In 1925, the first postage due stamps were created by overprinting stamps of the regular design with the word postage due for the British stamps and chiffre taxe for the French stamps. As the British values of 30 centimes and 1 franc did not exist, they were printed to perform the overprinting, and the production was performed by De La Rue again. 2,100 sets of the British series were produced, and the number of French sets is unknown. The postage due or chiffre taxe stamps were thought until the 1970s to be non-existent on cover, but then a lot of letters made by Monsieur Leral showed up. A cover maker, a well-known cover maker throughout especially the French South Pacific, and he had produced a lot of philatelic inspired letters using the postage due stamps. This is one example, an incoming letter from Cambodia to Port Vila that is under-franked with only 1 centime and franked with a British postage due stamp. Then we come to the year 1938. A new definitive series was launched, and this new series was issued on the 1st of June 1938. For the first time, the stamps were issued in a single currency, the so-called gold franc. This was an artificial currency that was used by the UPU for postal rates. The reason for introducing this fictional but stable currency was the growing disparity between the two colonial currencies in the 1930s. Great Britain had left the gold standard in 1929. The stamps pictured the volcano on the island of Lopevi. They were based on a design made by Jean Guillot and were recess printed by Bradbury Wilkinson in England in sheets of 30. About 20 years after these stamps were issued, the volcano on the island of Lopevi, which is shown in these stamps, erupted, and it erupted so heavily that the whole population had to be evacuated, and they were not able to return until today. Those are both sets completely. Some examples. This is a local letter. This letter was sent from Port Vila, not far away, only to the little village of Mele, only a couple of kilometers away, and is franked with the local postage rate of 5 gold centime. As you can imagine, a local mail is not easy to come by. And then there are two examples. Here are two examples of the use of the 10 gold centime value, which was the tariff for regular letters to colonial destinations. On the right side, a first cover to Sydney, New South Wales, with the correct new colonial postage of 10 gold centime. And on the left side, a letter to Australia, a typical letter of that time, franked with the same tariff. One of the few civilian letters of that time that was not censored. Censorship had started right after the war in Europe began in September 39. Then this is a registered colonial mail. On the left side, a registered letter to Australia, franked correctly with 30 gold centime. 10 gold centime, as I said, was the intercolonial letter rate, plus 20 gold centime intercolonial registration fee. Again, this letter was, for some reason, not censored. On the right side, another early use. This time it's to France. With the same tariff. Then 30 gold centime was also the regular tariff for non-colonial destinations for regular letters up to 20 gram. On the left side, a censored letter to the United States, franked correctly with these 30 gold centime. A missionary letter on the right side, a letter to the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva, which is also franked with this non-colonial letter rate of 30 gold centime. As you see, both letters went through censorship. The one on the left side was censored, opened, and censored in the New Hebrides themselves. And the one on the right side went through censorship in the New Hebrides, but was not opened, as you can see. The Red Cross seemed trustworthy. There are two examples of censored letters, both to the United States. The one on the right side was opened and censored in Australia, in Sydney, and the one on the left side in the New Hebrides themselves, you can see the bilingual registration label on the left side. Two examples of early airmail. This is in fact pre-war airmail use. On the left side, a pre-World War II register letter to Paris that was forwarded within France, and the letter is franked correctly with 1.50 gold franc, of which 1.20 gold franc was the airmail surcharge alone. On the right side, a nice letter that was sent from the remote island of Pentecost in the north of the New Hebrides to Paris. Then here are two missionary letters of the 1940s. Nothing special about them, just nice to look at. Two examples of rather unusual destinations. On the right side, a registered airmail letter to Argentina that is correctly franked with 1.70 gold centime, and on the left side, an airmail letter from the small island of Aoba or Ambae to Denmark, which is also franked correctly with the non-colonial letter rate and twice the airmail surcharge to non-colonial Europe. Two letters to French colonial destinations. I thought I should show them because I'm talking to the Friends in Colonial Society. Both are from the early 1950s. The one is to French Morocco, to Casablanca, and one to Saigon in Indochina. Okay, and in the early 1940s, world history arrived at the New Hebrides. The French administration made history in refusing to give allegiance to the superior colonial administration of New Caledonia, which was loyal to the regime of Vichy, and joining the France Libre, or Free France movement of General de Gaulle as the very first French colonial territory at all on the 22nd of July 1940. The overprint France Libre was made in New Caledonia, which had joined the France Libre movement shortly after the New Hebrides. In fact, also New Caledonia and Wallis and Futuna stamps were overprinted. 5,960 whole French sets were overprinted and released in Port Vila and in Santo in April 1941. A part of that, the larger part, was sent to General de Gaulle's headquarters in London and sold to collectors. That is the whole set. As I said, only the French series was overprinted. A lot of covers bearing the overprints are of philatelic origin, like these. On the left side, a first day cover to Australia, and on the right side, another Hambly cover to Australia. But there are also examples of commercial use. Here are two letters to Sydney and to Manchester with the correct intercolonial tariff of 10 gold centime. Both were censored in Australia. A very late use of the France Libre overprints. from 1946. The stocks of the overprinted stamps were exhausted relatively fast, but some remained in private hands. And this is a registered ship letter sent from the small island of Ambrym to Los Angeles, California. The sender, John Leslie Mitchell, was an Anglo-Australian planter who ran the Rannon plantation on Ambrym for many years. He was said to have a relatively large library, large in South Pacific standards of that time. And so it is no wonder that he was in postal contact with this Mr. Paul Dorn, who was a librarian. Probably he ordered some books for his small library. Postage due stamps were issued as well, as in 1925, the definitives were overprinted with postage due and chiffre tax, and the overprinting was performed by Bradbury Wilkinson. The British set and the regular French set are very, very, very scarce on commercial mail, while the France Libre overprinted stamps is non-existent on commercial mail. Of the regular sets without the overprint, a couple of philatelic philately inspired covers are known that were made by a gentleman named Schreiber, but there is a handful of commercial covers. One of them is this one here, an inwards letter from Australia bearing 6.5 pennies. That was an underpayment and was taxed with 15 gold centime on arrival at Port Vila on on August 7th, 1951. The sender was the department store Anthony Horton and Sons, once the largest department store in Sydney. And the addressee was Gabriel Gomichon de Grange, a French lawyer and planter who ran the Bellevue plantation near Port Vila. As I said, the chiffre tax stamps on commercial cover are relatively scarce. I was lucky to find that on eBay. Unfortunately, the left stamp is damaged, but in this field you have to take what you can get. Then the last series for today is the 1949 UPU issue. This issue represents the first series of commemorative stamps of the New Hébrides. It was a British omnibus issue celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Postal Union. In fact, the original British omnibus issue had 4 different motives. For the New Hebrides issue, only one motive was picked: the monument in front of the UPU building in Bern, Switzerland. And the stamps were issued with a British series or an English series and a French series. And this is the way in that almost all commemorative stamps of the New Hebrides until 1980, and there was a lot, were issued. 1 English issue, 1 French issue, both stamps every time, 2 stamps every time. The UPU issue is rarely seen on commercial covers because most of the stamps were used for FTCs and commemorative letters. But if you are patient, then you can find some commercial examples. On the left, the letter to New Caledonia, labeled as airmail, but franked as a regular letter. And on the right side, a commercial cover to France, franked with 55 gold centime, and therefore, unfortunately, slightly overpaid, or not overpaid, but insufficient postage, because the regular tariff would have been 60 gold centime. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for your patience.
Clemens, do you want to unshare your screen?
Sure.
Maybe I can do that. There we go. That was terrific.
Thank
I,
you.
I posed a question through the chat, and that is, were the France Libre overprints faked as often as they have been for Wallace and Futuna?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Questions from other people? Remember to unmute.
Yes, I have one. First, that was wonderful. I certainly enjoyed it. And I was wondering, once the gold francs were established as the currency, I guess that was the currency, the only currency used for purchasing postage after, say, what, 1930 something?
Mhm.
So did people who were working with British currency there, did they have to first get their currency changed into the French gold currency before they could buy postage stamps?
No, the gold currency was a virtual currency. There were no coins, no bills. It was just a virtual currency, and both the French francs and the British sterling, pound sterling, had to be, well, some calculated.
Oh, so you would go to the post office with whatever currency you had,
Yep.
and then the postal clerk would just calculate how much you had to pay in either currency.
Yes, according to the day's rate.
Oh, okay. So the post office sort of acted like the currency, like a currency exchange office in a way, just
Yes.
at least temporarily.
I once talked to was in Port Villa in the 1970s, and he told me that posting a letter was a very time-consuming activity because they had to calculate the daily rate.
Okay, thank you.
Ed Grabowski here, Clemens.
Good to see you.
I have two sort of quick questions. One, you mentioned the possibility of insurance on one of the earlier covers.
Yes.
Are there any known declared value covers from New Hebrides?
Not to my knowledge, no.
No.
I might be wrong about that, but I haven't heard of one.
Okay, another question, again, about 40% into the talk. You mentioned an item with a Service Maritime cancel. Isn't that a New Caledonia cancel? Or did they have a Service Maritime cancel in the New Hebrides?
They had a Service Maritime cancel, yes.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Ed, I'm surprised you haven't popped up a couple of your old group type covers to add to Clemens' presentation.
So since you mentioned it, so this is Loic. Going back to those group type stamps from New Caledonia used in New Hebrides. So with the ships that were doing the service from island to island, I think Alain had some in his collection with the WWII kind of hand stamp on them. Have you seen some of those, and how common are they? Or I guess just handful.
I have seen some of them, unfortunately not in my collection. I don't know how many there are, but it can't be that many.
Yeah.
Probably relatively rare.
But great presentation.
But I've seen some of them.
Any more? Well, if not, I will close off the recording. Let's do that first. Yes, I